Good morning, Namaste. I am Anshul Sharma, Counselor Education from Embassy of India in Washington, DC, and welcome you all to a discussion with eminent soil scientist, Professor Ratan Lal. This event is part of India at 75 lecture series, celebrating 75 years of India's independence. Professor Lal serves as Distinguished University Professor of Soil Science and Founding Director of the Carbon Management and Sequestration Center at the Ohio State University. He has grown up in India with initial college education in Punjab and Delhi. Often referred to as the godfather of soil science, he has done pioneering research on the restoration of soil health. Professor Lal considers soil as a living entity and has led global efforts to improve agriculture systems. He has won numerous accolades, honors, and awards throughout his career of more than 5 decades. More recently, he was awarded Padma Shri this year, the World Food Prize in 2020, and in 2019, he was awarded the Japan Prize. We also have a panel of Indian students in the United States. These include Panav, Akash, Manoj, Ravindra, Sayantan, Prakash, Abhishek, and Gurjinder, who all have a special interest in soil science and environmental issues. We will begin today's discussion with a presentation by Professor Lal. After the presentation, I will be inviting our student panelists to interact with Professor Lal. I will also request Professor Lal to throw some light on the emerging areas of research in soil science and the opportunities for our students. Now I request Professor Lal to initiate the discussion. Sir.
Thank you very much for your very kind and generous introduction, but more importantly for inviting me to this program, which I consider a very important event, because talking to younger students is an important part of the duty of a professor. It's a great honor to work with you, sir, as a part of the Indian Embassy. And as a citizen of India, native of India, it is my duty to serve our community, especially the younger generation. So I want to thank you for the invitation. I'm going to share the screen. You should be able to see the bigger screen now.
Yes, sir.
Okay. The topic that I want to talk briefly is the restoration and sustainable management of soils of India for food, climate, and water security. And the part which I like to focus on at the moment is what was the situation of food security in India during 50s and 60s when I was growing up in Punjab, Haryana, Delhi area. There was a book which was written and it was called The Population Bomb. And the book specifically said, author was Ehrlich, I have yet to meet anyone familiar with the situation who thinks India would be food self-sufficient by 1971, if ever. That was the statement that came out at that time. Then there was another book called Famine 1975. It was written by two brothers, Paddock and Paddock, and they specifically indicated India cannot be saved. Bangladesh is a basket case. And these were the sentiments globally during the 60s and 70s. And now we know that increase in food production in India, South Asia general, have not only been dramatic, but data has been largely unpredicted. Nobody really expected that. I think in a way, the COVID situation at the moment is the same way. Everybody's frightened. Of course, it's a very serious issue, but with determination, with hard work, with sincerity, with commitment, problems, which are challenges, can be, should be, must be overcome. And food security is definitely one example of that. For example, India has 18% of the world population. 1.4 billion is 18% of the population. India's land area is only 2.4% of the world. So 18% of the population. is living in 2.4% of the area. There are many other issues. Water resources, India has only 4%. Cattle population of India is 31% of world's livestock. So obviously, both human and cattle population are major issue. But this is what India has done, in spite of all those doomistic prophecies, which I shared with you. Net sown area of the cropland between 1970 and right now, 50-year period, is the same, 140 million hectare. Hectare, by the way, is 2.5 acres approximately. Gross sown area, although, has gone up. The gross means 140 hectare actually is being used as 200 million hectare, which means double cropping. More than one crop on the same land in 1 year. So that is a progress. That's a science implementation. That's a hard work by the farmer. At the same time, India's irrigation area has gone up from 30 million hectare in 1970 to almost 70 million hectare at present, which is a remarkable achievement. Fertilizer use in India, and I'll come back to that in a moment. It has advantages and disadvantages both, but the fertilizer use was 2 million tons in 1970, is 26 million tons, 13 times at present. So as a result of that, between 1947, at the time of independence, and 2020, the food grain production in India went up by a factor of 6, from 50 million tons to 300 million tons. The population, on the other hand, has not gone at that rate. The food grain production, similar to that, horticulture production, from 32 million ton, it has gone to 320 million ton by a factor of 10. Milk by a factor of 9. Fish by a factor of 13. So grain production went up by a factor of 6. Horticulture, that's fruits, vegetables, by a factor of 10. Milk by 9. Fish by 13. India exports grain 20 million tons, which is a $40 billion worth every year. India has a grain buffer stock of 50 million ton. India's poverty, which was 70% of the total in 1947, is now 20%. And hopefully, in the next decade, by 2030, that number will go even further low. It should. I hope that it can be done. But there are certain things that we have to consider, and that is the environmental part. While the food production, as you said, is a dramatic success story, something to be proud of, something remarkable achievement, nobody ever expected it to happen. Our farmers, our scientists, our general public, our policymakers, I salute them all. I was outside the country, so I can't claim much credit for any of those things. They have done a remarkable job. But there are certain problems which we have to address. One problem is pollution of water. The environmental footprint, which includes soil degradation, water pollution, air pollution, loss of biodiversity. This is the issue. So what we have to talk about, and this is what was asked to talk to the younger generation today, is India must reconcile the need to increase food and nutritional security with the absolute necessity to restore and improve the environment. We have done one part, we must take care of the other part, and the other can be done, should be done, must be done. And that is the part we want to focus on. What can be done in future so that our beautiful cities like Rashtrapati Bhavan in Delhi does not look like this, or our beautiful river like Yamuna does not look like this. And that we must take care of. So we have a problem of, although we achieve food security, we have a problem of soil degradation, polluted water, impure air, we have loss of biodiversity. So the question is, what can be done? What can you do? the younger generation. We also have a problem, in spite of all that success, we have a problem of hidden hunger and malnutrition, water quality, renewability, climate change, One Health concept issue. I'll talk very briefly how health of everything else is linked with soil health. How can another income stream be generated by selling carbon in vegetation and soil to industry, perhaps, who are interested in being emission neutral? And is it possible that we could also think about soil-less agriculture so that agriculture can be done without soil? So I begin with a concept called return, the law of return. You may not remember in your reading, because many of you are not in soils per se, but we had Sir Albert Howard exactly 100 years ago, 1920. He was a scientist based in Indore, obviously British, and he was president of the Indian Science Academy in 1920. And he came up with the concept of robbery. Harvesting from land without returning is a robbery of the soil and a banditry, a particularly mean form of banditry, because it involves robbing of future generations which are not here to defend themselves. And I take that very seriously. It's written a book called Agriculture Testament, and I think he did a remarkable job. Many of you may know there's a compost mechanism process called Indore pit. Many people who do not understand Indore, they think it's an indoor pit. No, it's an indoor city where he developed a composting pit, but that was his concept. We also have a problem of food waste. Almost 30 to 40% of the total food produced, and I gave you that figure, how much it produced, is wasted. Because of the storage facility, because of the poor infrastructure, which should be. And here is what we are talking about: robbery. You take away from soil everything. You take away grains for eating, you take away straw for selling it for cattle food, whatever else is left, you graze. That means the Mother Earth who produced that thing does not get anything. It got robbed of everything. And that is what Albert Howard was talking about, robbery. And that's what he said, mean type of robbery, because it affects us also. And I'll talk to you about that in a moment. So you see this very common scene. And then these days we have this problem where the rice straw in October, November is burnt because there is not enough time. They cannot wait for the ground to be plowed at straw. They burn it so they can sow wheat in practically 2 weeks' time after harvesting rice. So they are pressed. They sometimes are desperate. And this is again something that the younger generation should do it. So burning of the residue is very serious problem. The other problem with soil are being undermined is urbanization. And Indian cities are growing very rapidly. New Delhi, over my lifetime, from 1950, it was 1 million. It is going to be 36 million by 2030. Largest city of the world will be Delhi. Calcutta gone up by a factor of 4, Bombay by a factor of 9, Pune by a factor of 10, Hyderabad 12, Bangalore 21, Chennai, major cities growing tremendously. So we have to think how to feed that population, large cities population. Other problem is of the cities brick making. In the Indo-Gangetic plain, Punjab, Haryana, there's no timber, there's no stones. So how are you going to make the construction? By bricks. Where do the brick come from? Scalp the topsoil to 1 meter depth. You take a train from Delhi to Amritsar, I do sometime to Chandigarh, and I count the number of brick kilns. And it's alarming. A soil that took millions of years to make, 1 meter of soil, is gone in a day for brick making. So urbanization in India takes about 40,000 hectares to provide accommodation infrastructure to 1 million people. India is increasing about 11.5 million every year. That takes 500,000 hectares of new land under urban growth. And by 2025, India will have 7 cities, more than 10 million people. And a city of 10 million people requires 6,000 tons of food every day. So daily, with 36 million people, is going to require 20 to 24,000 tons of food every day. Food coming into the city and the nutrients consumed not going back to the land where they came from, instead becoming a liability, is a problem we have to address. Is it possible? And this is a question I want you, younger generation, to think. Is it possible to recycle the nutrients coming into the food, into the large city in a hygienic, safe way, so that perhaps 15-20% of the fresh produce, vegetable, extra, horticulture thing can be grown within the city limits by the so-called modern urban agriculture. That's what I call soil-less agriculture. That is what I was thinking about. Here is how those brick kilns look like. You pass through Haryana and this kind of scenery happens. And somewhere we have to think, can we demarcate areas which are off limit? Nobody can remove the soil out of it. And can we somehow stop, think about other materials of making bricks? Rather than scalping from the topsoil everywhere, can you identify in each district or in each village a certain area which you can mine maybe half a mile deep clay, deeper and deeper for brick making, rather than removing from everywhere? Can it become a policy issue? Something very serious, but nobody pays attention to it. So let's talk about brick. India has brick kiln 140,000. This was about 2-3 years ago. Maybe there are 150,000 now. Average land area under each brick kiln is 5 hectares. So the growth rate of brick kiln is about 2 to 5% per year. Land area affected by brick making is almost 1 million hectares per year. Total number of bricks produced is about 250 billion per year. Soil organic carbon that is burnt in the bricks, not the material which is burning to bake them, is 6 million tons of carbon. Teragram is 1 million tons of carbon. And it's going into the air, pollutant. The total carbon dioxide and the soot. We can certainly do something about it. And in spite of all that, we still have 47 million children under 5 which are hungry, 194 million people who do not have enough and adequate food. Almost 51% of the young mother are anemic, and they are deficient of micronutrients. Therefore, we have to really think what to do. So rather than thinking about pills and medicines, perhaps we should think about healthy food. When diet is wrong, medicine is of no use. And when diet is correct, medicine is of no need. So we have to really go back to the diet. And that is where we come back to the concept of One Health. The One Health concept says that the health of soil, plants, animals, human, ecosystems, environment, and the planet is interconnected. That is what we say, people are mirror image of the soil they live on. When soil is poor, people are poor. Environment is poor, planet is poor, and vice versa. That is where you begin to change things. When you take away 1 meter of topsoil where all the nutrients and vitamins and micronutrients and minerals are, and you simply underground sand, put more water on it, and maybe some nitrogen grow, the food is deficient in essential nutrients. So we must learn also lessons from COVID-19. As you know, currently we have a very serious issue. Even today's newspaper, oxygen issue, I was reading. We must learn to live in symbiosis, in harmony, in peace, in tranquility with nature, not against nature. We are nature. We are part of nature. That's what our culture says. So you must think about our values, our lifestyle. Even small difference can make a huge difference when you multiply by 1.4 billion people, or on a global scale, when you multiply small change you make in your lifestyle by 8 billion people. So everything, please remember, each one of us is a culprit and a victim. Here is the victim. This is the beautiful India Gate. This is the way it should look. And it did look like this last April, May. This picture was taken when Delhi was locked down. This is the way the Yamuna looked when the industry dumps the pollutants. The same spot when the dumping was stopped, the way the Yamuna looked. This is the way River Ganges looks. The Ghats, beautiful when this river is, Ganges has a rare dolphin. Nobody had seen them, and they all of a sudden appeared everywhere. Beautiful thing to cherish and to see. Some other wildlife which all of a sudden appeared at a time when there was a lockdown. You could see the snow-peak Himalayan beauties of the world from 100 miles away. India is one of the most beautiful places. We do not take care of it. Younger generation have to take care of it. This is your heritage. Gandhi said, to forget how to dig the earth and to tend the soil is to forget ourselves. How dare we forget who we are? How dare we forget what our Sanskriti is? How dare we forget what our culture is? How dare we forget Mother Earth is mother of all? We have to take care of it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for a very enlightening presentation on how initially India has beaten odds in achieving food self-sufficiency and the challenges which now the younger generation has to face to carry the good work forward. I now request our student panelists to initiate discussion and ask their questions or raise their issues. I will also request each panelist to begin with a brief introduction about themselves. Panav, will you like to go first?
My question is regarding CCS, carbon capture and storage. Which method do you think is the most effective? And do you think CCS justifies oil and gas and coal companies to mine and produce more oil and gas just because of the ability for us to capture and store carbon? Thank you.
Carbon capture is a part of what we call mitigation strategy. So when you want to reduce the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, one is to reduce emission, and the other is to sequester what has been emitted. And sequestering what is emitted in the atmosphere has two options. One option is called geologic sequestration, and the other option is called terrestrial sequestration. Geologic sequestration is what you were talking about. Carbon capture from the chimney of a power plant, which is producing CO2 by burning coal to generate electricity extra, scrubbing that CO2, compressing it, liquefying it, and then injecting it in a saline aquifer, maybe a mile deep in the ground, or in a rock strata which is stable, or below the ocean floor, maybe a mile deep, so under the You are a fluid mechanics person, you know the water column pressure will keep the CO2 there, does not. So on the terrestrial sequestration is what I do. My center, Carbon Management Sequestration Center, it looks at the carbon sequestration in soil and the trees. And that is not capturing and injecting. That is natural solution to grow trees and plants and restore wetland and do not take away the residue. Remember I was showing that picture of animal-driven cars taking away the biomass? No, leave it on the ground as share of the earth. That's what exactly that is. That's the terrestrial. And the terrestrial carbon sequestration has two parts, organic and inorganic. Inorganic, where CO2 evolved in the soil, is dissolved into water, rain or irrigation, and become carbonic acid. And carbonic acid reacts with calcium, magnesium, potassium, and it precipitates in the soil. So there are two mechanisms, organic, biomass becoming humus, and inorganic becoming carbonates and bicarbonates that can be leached out. So the question, second part was, do fossil industry have rights to burn more? No. If we right now decide, and India is signatory to that, to emit less and less emission, by 2050 have zero coming from fossil fuel, by 2030 reduce by certain percent, like 30% or so, and then at the same time do terrestrial sequestration, then it is possible that by 2050 we will stabilize the atmosphere and CO2 will start coming down. So do companies have right to burn more? No. Should we find no carbon fuel sources? Yes. Should we focus on solar? India is endowed with a lot of, Rajasthan, in fact, is an example of surplus solar energy. So solar, wind, hydro, geo, thermal, even nuclear done properly are the options we should consider. Hydrogen as a fuel source. Hydrogen not produced from coal, but from water, the fission part that we have been talking about. And at the same time, what we call negative emission agriculture. I did not go into the science of that, but that's what I was talking about. Not robbing land, but put things back on. So that is a strategy, and for which we need policies. Policy rather than farmer burning the residue. If we compensate them and give them proper technology to stop that. So that's the way we should be thinking about.
According to you, what kind of challenges are there which are preventing an activity like mulching from being implemented in India, and what can we do to practice it more? And my second question is related to one of the leading government of India's scheme, which is Raftar, the remunerative approaches for agriculture and allied sector rejuvenation, which is targeted towards achieving 4% annual growth in agriculture. What kind of technical and management programs or a joint combination of those do you think in your vision will help to achieve higher growth, or I should say sustainable growth in Indian agriculture? Thank you.
First of all, yes, India has a very serious soil erosion problem, both by water and wind. In fact, I had a slide, I took it out last minute. Almost 100 million hectare total out of 140 cultivated. Remember, I showed you that figure, are affected by some kind of degradation. 100 million hectare, more than 100 million hectare affected by erosion by water and wind, salinization, brick making, depletion of organic matter content, soil compaction, structural degradation, water logging, many, many things. And the tolerable rate in the US is considered about 5 tons per acre per year, which is too much. Your figure 16 tons per hectare comes to about 6 tons per acre. That is very high. Let me first give you an example of how it was done in the US. In 1987, the Farm Bill, and now in the US, next Farm Bill is coming up, probably next year or the following year. There was an act in which they said highly erodible land, HED, cannot be cultivated. And therefore, farmers who do not cultivate those land, they will be paid equivalent to what they would have earned if they had cultivated. This was called Conservation Reserve Program. And under the Conservation Reserve Program implemented in 1987 until about 5 years ago, 40 million acres were set aside, retired, not cultivated. As a result, the sediment transport in Mississippi River was less than half from 1987. I, in fact, published a book on that. This is what happened. But farmers are paid. India needs to do the same thing. Right now, there is a Resolution Act. I'm not going to say into something. I sent something to the newspaper this morning. Anyway, what I wrote was about Growing Climate Resolution Act. It is right now passing through the US Senate floor. 4 senators, Stabenow, Senator Brown, Senator Whitehouse, one more senator forgot. Many other originally proposed this bill, and then 45 or so senators are supporting it. I think if it is presented and discussed properly, both parties will approve it. What it means is that we are going to compensate farmers for sequestering carbon, which means the Conservation Reserve Program that we are talking about, if farmers do no-till, grow cover crops. Joe Biden, his 100-day address, not many people heard that. Not many people thought what he said. There are no big news about it. He used the word cover crop. Cover crop means, and that is what I wrote this morning. Here was something that nobody paid attention, but very important, cover crop. The idea is in November, December, like when our farmers are burning the residue, farmers here should plant a cover crop. Cover crop means ground will be covered through the winter and spring by alfalfa, by vetch, by winter wheat, by rye. So ground is not bare. And then in the spring, like right now, the ground is always covered and nothing is open. And then you seed through it without plowing. And they will pay farmers for doing it. And that is what I supported in my writing. And I said, farmers should be paid $60 per hectare. That is about $25 per acre if they did it. If they don't do it, don't pay them. India need to do the same thing. Don't burn. Leave the residue there. We can see it by remote sensing. If you do it, we will pay you. If somebody doesn't do it, do not punish them. Just don't give them anything. That will do it. We have to be pro-nature, pro-farmer, pro-agriculture, and pro-poor. Poor in this case is the soil. That's the worst. We have to be pro that. Our policy should support it. And it is not, think about it, looking at India, Bihar, many other places, a lot of floods in September, August, monsoon time. And then come June, no water. Even in Cherrapunji with 500 inches of rainfall, 1 month there is no rain, there is no water, drought. So drought and flood are the same problem. When the soil is not managed, land is not managed properly, during the rain time, there's a flood. During the no rain, there's a... So the question has been said, what can be done? The lower Himalayas, Shivalik Hills, Vindhyachal, other, they're all denuded. Make a law, when the land is more than X% slope, like 7%, it shall always be kept under permanent vegetation like forest. So Shivalik Hills, if India were to develop a treaty with countries of these Himalayas from Afghanistan all the way to Cambodia, encourage them that above 7% slope should all be forested. If we start today, in your time, 25 years from now, the entire hills will be covered. There will be no floods. Stream will be perennial. There will be no sediment. And the younger people who have no job, they'll be trained in how to grow nursery, how to plant, how to tend the tree, water quality will be clean. It will be a win-win-win-win option. The erosion is a symptom of land misuse and soil mismanagement. When a land is covered always, and that's the way it should be, there will be no erosion, there will be no flood. Nature takes care of it.
Not talking particularly about soil, but climate change as a whole. We know that developed countries are the ones who are to be blamed, and obviously coming from a developing country, we can't say that we don't have any onus or liability to protect the environment. So how do you think like these things can go hand in hand?
For me, as a physical scientist, I'm a soil scientist, soil physicist to be exact. Unless my science is translated into action, it has no meaning. So science is translated into action by two ways. One is by policy, and the other is by education, where you communicate with people. So what you are doing is very important, very commendable. I'm going to come back to Sustainable Development Goals. Remember what that is. It's the Agenda 2030. The United Nations in 2015 adopted 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Goal number 1, end hunger and poverty by 2030. Goal number 2, end hunger. Goal number 3, human well-being. I think 6 is water quality. Goal number 13 is climate action. 15 is land life on lands. All those 17. India is signatory to that. I am rather sad to mention that the world on the whole, all 150 nations, are not on track to what they signed. We certainly can do something. And that's the policy part, which is very important. So one policy part I want to mention, you talked about countries like India and other developing countries did not burn much before, and now they are burning, and developed countries are saying don't burn. So what should we do? I give in my class one question. I say calculate a carbon pie. What's a carbon pie? How much will be the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere beyond which climate warming will be more than 2 degrees centigrade? You remember the limit that we all agreed on at COP21 in Paris. So that we think is twice what it was before the Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution was 280 parts per million CO2. Twice that is 560 parts per million. What is the concentrations out now? About 415 parts per million. So for the sake of simplicity, let's say it's 410 parts per million. So 560 minus 410, 560 what it can be before tipping point, and 410 where we are now. So 560 minus 410, that would be how much? 150 different, 560 minus 410, 150. And if you multiply 150 by 2.13, and I'll explain you whether or divide by 0.47, that gives you about 320. What is that multiplying factor is? How do you convert 1 part per million into gigaton of carbon from coal or oil combustion that you can emit? That comes to 320, which means humanity has a global cake pie of 320 gigaton of carbon that we can emit before catastrophe happens. The question is to you as a policy student, and if I was a Secretary General, I will ask him the same question. What do you do? How do you divide that pie amongst the nation? That's the question. Some have been burning before, And now they are saying don't burn. The other have not burned in the past, and now they want to burn, but they can't burn. So somewhere we have to find out nation by nation, how much is the equal share that we could have going back to 1750 till now, and those records are available, and then develop a formula which is just, fair, equitable, and transparent, and then implement it. Carbon intensity was developed by Mr. Bush. And what he said was that we will not reduce emission, we will reduce our intensity. And intensity is emission per unit of GDP. So you have emission divided by GDP. So when you sign that I'll reduce emission at the rate of 2% per year, and your GDP is going up at the rate of 4% per year, you're not doing anything. It's automatically going down. Eventually, we have to bite the bullet. We have to bite the bullet. We have to find no carbon fuel sources. You cannot create terminology to go around it.
What are 2 or 3 important things that young people can do on a daily basis? 2 or 3 actionable things that young people, let's say age 35 and below, who live in the cities, Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, can do on a daily basis that will have a positive impact on the soil health.
I salute you and others who will accept personal responsibility, who will say, yes, I'm responsible. Remember, I said we are culprit and we are victims. So if we accept, yes, I don't take things for granted, I'm going to change. So the first thing, I also talked to that in my class also. For example, what is the environmental footprint of your lifestyle right now? Environmental footprint can be calculated in terms of the carbon footprint. In the US, carbon footprint is average per person is 20 metric tons of CO2 per year. Globally, it is 5 metric ton. US is about 4 times. India is probably somewhere closer to 5. We can calculate our water footprint. We can calculate our energy footprint. And see if you can try to somehow establish a baseline and then do simple things to reduce it. If everybody were to reduce their environmental footprint by 1% per year, now you are 25, by the time you are 50, and you have really made a good progress, and multiply that by 50 could be very, very tremendous. Coming back specifically to that, taking not things for granted from India point of view, and again, going back to Shri Modi ji, he started an Andolan called Swachh Bharat, remember?
Right.
That's a very important one. Each one of us, I see many times, I walk around on the campus, and I see a professor walking ahead of me, and there will be a piece of garbage, a paper or something lying along the pathway, and they'll pick it up and put it in a near garbage dump somewhere. It's a small act, but has made a difference. So each one of us, perhaps we can say, I will pick up 2 pounds of garbage from the roadside and put it in a proper place. If everybody did that, it's not going to make a big difference in terms of time spent, because while you're walking, you could do it. But simply you made a goal that I'm going to pick up 1 kilogram of it and put it properly. And do not worry whether others do it or not, just do it by yourself. And hopefully everybody else will do it. That can make Bharat really, really Swachh. The other day we were talking about plastic dumping everywhere. Can somehow plastic be picked up and recycled perhaps? You know, in the US we have a garbage collection, and there's a recycling bin, and there's a garbage, and there's a biomass. So biomass could be collected separately, make into compost. Remember I was talking about how to grow food within the city from the compost. So cleaning Swachh Bharat is very important. I think there should be a charge to somebody who throws away the food. It's a crime against nature. If you're going to throw away, it's going to go to landfill. Landfill is going to become methane and nitrous oxide, polluting water resources. Somebody has to pay for it, and you are the one who should pay. You ordered it. Polluter pays. So you decide yourself, I shall not throw waste, destroy food. Food is God, Anna Bhagavan. That is something we should do. Each one of us should do. For example, if you eat meat every day, 3 times, and you know how much a red meat, beef, pork, etc., in terms of the emission, in fact, it's available. You can Google it, you'll know it. If it's a chicken, how much? If it's a fish, how much? If it's a potato, how much is? And you can calculate your footprint of your diet, and then try to reduce it. Those tables are available.
Okay.
Absolutely. Same thing, water shower. Yes, I would love to have shower 30 minutes. I have seen that public shower. People stand there for 45 minutes. Hey, let go. 5 minutes is plenty. You're wasting water. Simple things can make, so calculate your water footprint, your food footprint, your footprint in terms of carbon emission total, and have a goal to reduce it. Saving food will save land. I'm connecting with several colleagues in UK and US to write an article, Returning Land Back to Nature. We are now globally cultivating 5 billion hectare of land. India was, I showed you, 140 million hectare. We don't need 5 billion hectare of land. I keep on hearing everybody saying, we are eating more meat, therefore we need more land. Why are we eating more meat in the first place? Right now, India's meat consumption is increasing 15% per year. What's wrong with vegetarian food?
We have seen the changing climate conditions, especially in terms of temperature. Now, with the global temperature, which is predicted to rise under the current scenario, how do you think that the indigenous crop varieties, especially that of rice and wheat, would be able to cope up with those? Will the crop production decrease, or will it remain the same, or will it be seriously impacted so as to affect the food production? Especially when you say that we have the population increase exponentially, whereas the food production may not be able to cope up with the rise in population. So that's my question.
Yes, it is correct that the increase in global temperature, especially in India, is going to reduce yield of rice, especially if the temperature is more at flowering time, and especially if the nighttime temperature also goes up. Because nighttime respiration will go up. That means whatever plants are producing during the day by photosynthesis is burnt out at night. So, and this is where adaptation of proper science-based technology, what we are talking about mulching. Mulching will keep the soil cool and moist. In fact, I used to monitor soil temperature in Africa under mulch versus bare ground plowed, and the difference can be 15 degrees Celsius in the top 1 centimeter. Moisture conservation is better. And then there are varieties which are more adapted to local conditions. So choice of species, choice of varieties, and better management practices. My philosophy is, it's not important what you grow, but how you grow it. Management is more important. So we can adapt to the changing climate by science-based improved management. So we have a possibility of still turning around and still not reducing productivity if we adopt science-based agricultural practices. And some of the practices we talked about already in other lectures, other questions, mulch farming, cover cropping. India has flood irrigation. India's one of the industrial supplier, Jain Irrigation, is the largest irrigation industry for drip irrigation. I did not realize that. And yet, flood irrigation, really developed in India 5,000 years ago, is still being used.
People are talking about zero carbon farming, negative carbon farming. You also talked about some of the measures, but could you please highlight some of the measures in Indian agriculture which can promote zero carbon farming or negative carbon farming? And also, and one more question, you talked about plastic pollution. Is there any feasibility of converting plastic pollution into some carbon nanotubes? Because I read some articles which talked about converting plastic pollution into carbon nanotubes as well. Thank you.
Yesterday we had a meeting in Brazil, and I was one of the speakers for their meeting, and they were promoting carbon neutral beef. You know, Brazil is very a beef exporter nation, and I told him, I'm sorry, it's not good enough. Let me give you an example. Let us say that a farmer in India is spending 500 kilogram of carbon in fertilizer, in plowing, in irrigation, in pesticides, and all those farm operations. So to make it carbon neutral mean he or she must produce 500 kilogram for production. Then it's carbon neutral. Can you feed the family in 500 kilogram?
No.
Absolutely not. These are slogans which are not well thought of. When you put in 500 rupees in a business and you get 500 back, can you live? No. How do you think agriculture can survive if that is the return? So if I invest 500 kilogram of carbon in agriculture, for it to be productive as a industry, I want 10 times more production. I'm a member of the UN Food Summit. Same thing came up. We want carbon neutral. For heaven's sake, think again. It had to be negative emission farming. Strongly negative. If you put in 500, you add into the soil and environment 5,000, 10,000. Sustainable intensification lab, Feed the Future is a great thing. We are talking about eco-intensification. Ecology is the problem. Environment is the problem. Again, there is not a matter of semantics, it's a matter of a real science-based world. Plastic, yes, there are many ways by which plastic can be used for regenerating energy. Plastic can be made into other product, but it should be banned to produce more, but recycled to generate energy from it and produce something which can stay longer. Plastic pollution in agriculture is a serious issue in North Asia, China, Korea, Japan, and it's becoming a problem in India also. We must stop it.
In climate change, like will the temperature increase be harmful to agriculture, or is it the reduced rainfall? And if it's reduced rainfall, like how should we deal with the reduced rainfall situation, because there is no substitute for water or rainfall? And like what type of strategies should we use to like adapt to overcome the risk of climate change on agriculture?
Thank you. Partly we have discussed this. We have what they call climate resilient agriculture. We were talking about mulch farming, cover cropping. You remember we're talking about hills covered with trees so that trees are sequestering carbon from the atmosphere, and trees also regulate the water, so reduce runoff. In terms of the water, it is not the amount of the rainfall, it is the effectiveness of the rainfall. India, in fact, is endowed with a very large amount of rainwater, very large amount. Many, as you know, North African and West Asian countries, other desert climate, including Southwest US, are very dry. India, on the other hand, is we are not effectively using that rainfall. So that is what I was talking about, land misuse, soil mismanagement. This is not, again, very well understood. The top 1 meter of soil, which we said we are taking out for brick making, is the largest reservoir of fresh water in the world. Think about it. Top 1 meter, and if you have a hectare of area, 100 meter by 100 meter, that the length width 1 meter deep, that tells you 10 to the 4 square, 10 to the 4 cubic meter. If soil has a 50% porosity, which mostly it has, half of that can be full of water, maximum, preferably 25% of it, because you want to leave it here. That's a lot of water storage. The problem is the way we manage the soil surface, the rainwater runs off, causing flood and killing people, not soaking into the ground. So it's a land misuse. So climate change effect can be reduced if we can manage our rainwater and surface albedo properly. Albedo is how much of the energy coming from sun can be reflected back. And how can you protect the surface of the soil from the solar insolation? And that's where mulch. Keep the ground always covered. Like I'm wearing the jacket because I do not want to be cold or hot. Soil is the same. It's a living thing. It must be protected, covered all the time. It is when we take away everything from soil, and I showed the picture, our burn water is left, and the ground is left bare, exposed to climate, rain, and all the other calamities. That is when the problem comes in. So we are a part of the problem, and we can be a solution also. We know the technology.
You're very well aware of the situation in Punjab or Haryana, Northwest India. We grow wheat and rice. And the rice is causing many problems, whether it's decline in water level, whether it's burning straw. So we know it's killing the environment, but that's the crop in which farmer most of them make most of the money. Even I could not convince my family to stop growing it. One of the solutions, we know it could be crop diversification. But how can we promote that? I keep on like brainstorming sometimes, and I think like maybe we are agriculture experts. We have so many agriculture experts. Why don't government work with agriculture experts and come up with a plan for the entire India where this crop can be promoted and then promote those crops with MSP. So this kind of solution. So I would like to have your thoughts on this problem, that how you think we can address this issue.
Rice should not be grown in Punjab or Haryana. If it is grown, it should be grown like wheat, the dryland rice and direct seeded rice. Otherwise, farmers have to be compensated. Like I was giving the example of the US, farmers have to be compensated for doing something else. If they are getting a certain amount of income, they should be compensated to get the same income. And those are the policy matters which are very important. They can be done rather than subsidizing irrigation, they should be subsidizing diversification. So redivert the same money for something else. The knowledge is there, it's a translating into action.
With this, we come to the end of today's discussion. I will once again like to thank Professor Lal and all our student panelists for taking out time to participate in our event. I will also like to remind our viewers that student researchers and postdoc researchers who want to get in touch with Professor Lal with potential ideas, etc., can do so through our Student Hub website. Please do check our website regularly for important updates and register with us if you have not already done so. Thank you. Thank you once again.